Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. Well, it's a cold day in the shop out here today, and I think I'm going to go ahead and start on this Ibanez neck. I'm going to put the frets in today, but first I have to do a little cleaning of the slots. I've already been at work kind of straightening and cleaning some of these slots, but I've got this little Japanese fret saw, and I'm going to be doing a second pass just to make sure everything's deep enough, and then I'm going to go ahead and check the depth with a gauge. And then I think we can go ahead and start pounding in some frets. Now, like I said, I've got this little StewMac Japanese fret saw here. It's double-sided, so you can push or pull with it. And I've got a plastic hammer, and I've got a set of frets. And this fret wire is Fender fret wire, and it's medium gauge. It's pre-radiused to, I believe, 9.5. And I did put a 12-inch radius in this, but I think that'll work itself out as I'm pounding those in. Basically, I'd rather have a little bit too much radius in the fret wire pre-bent than not have enough, and I think that will help with the engagement at the ends of the frets anyway. All right, let me get started drawing this little saw through these fret slots as a first step. Now, I don't do a lot of this, so I'm not an expert by any means, but one thing that I'm doing as I'm going through here is I'm making sure that there is an even depth across the slot and that there is no trash in the end of any of the slots. Something else I've been doing just to make sure that my slots are ready is running a diamond-shaped file through each one of the slots just to kind of open up the very top just a little bit. This one's actually more of a triangular shaped file, but it does the job really well. I think that last step just helps open up the top of the slot just a little bit so that every one of the frets seats a little bit easier. It's something that I've seen real luthiers do, and it worked really well for me on my last fret job. Now I've got a small depth gauge that we're going to check and make sure that the depth and the radius is okay on each one of the slots. This is a StewMac tool. And a lot of times I'll use it for fret slot cleaning. So I'll just stick it in the slot and run it back and forth and just make sure there's no trash in the slot. But it actually has a radius gauge on it as well as a depth gauge. It's got a couple of lines that you make sure that you're in the target for where the fret will land. Looks like everything's okay, but I'm going to go ahead and check each one of the slots. All right, well, it's time to install this medium fret wire. I'm just going to do that with a hammer. I know a lot of people like to use a press or a caul on a press, and that would be cool, but I just don't have that kind of stuff because I don't do very many fret jobs. This has worked well for me in the past. If you do it this way, it does require more leveling and crowning at the end, but if it just doesn't make financial sense for you to buy a tool, I don't know if you really need one. So this fret wire comes pre-cut. It's a little bit long and it gets a little bit longer as you go towards the top of the neck, but I don't know that I'm going to cut it any shorter. I think I'm just going to install them as is. This fret size doesn't match the original exactly, although it's roughly the same height. It's just not quite as wide. Yeah, I think that's going to work out great. The main thing as you install these is to make sure that you have a firm surface that you're seating down into, and that's why I've got these 2x4s to kind of level the neck, and I've got the top of the neck sitting in my neck cradle, and I'll move everything around as I get through all the frets to make sure everything is supported as I beat in each one of the frets, but I'm starting here at the high end and I'll work my way up. I've seen some other luthiers online who, when they hammer in their frets, they like to beat down the edges just to kind of bend them down a little bit. I'm not going to do that. I'm not sure if it's right or wrong, but I'm just telling you right now, that's not the way I do these. Now, once all the frets are installed, I do check with the straight edge to make sure there's not any high spots. And I'll do that with a long straight edge as well as with a fret rocker on a couple of the frets. And then if I find any high spots, I just beat them back in with a hammer. For minor high spots or low spots, you'll take care of those when you do your leveling and crowning. All right, I'm ready to cut these things off, and I'm gonna start with a set of StewMac fret end cutters. And all I do is get right up to the edge of the fretboard and cut them straight off. I always try to keep track of these little ends because they're rather sharp and I just don't want them laying around my shop. All right, my next step is going to be to knock down the burrs on the sides of the frets from where they stuck out from cutting, and then to put a little bit of a bevel on each end. To do that, I've got this tool here. You lay it flat to get the edges of those frets flat to the side of the neck, and then there's an angled side to put the bevel on. So you run it this way, to take the edges off the frets, and then you flip it up and turn it over and run it this way to put the bevel on there. You might wonder how much to actually do this step, and really it's all by feel. So if you can still feel a burr at the end of your fret, you probably have more work to do. The other way to gauge it is when you start seeing rosewood dust coming up in your filings, then you've probably gone far enough. All right, we're getting along pretty well here. I think what I'm going to do next is I'm probably going to try to get some rosewood dust in the ends of the frets there and put some glue just on the ends. That not only helps fill in the gaps that are sitting underneath each one of the fret tangs where the slots were just a little bit too deep, but it also will help hold the fret ends in a little bit better. If you rub a little rosewood dust into that little void under the fret and then drop super glue on top of it, that pretty much does the job. All you have to do is remove the excess super glue at the end. And I'm going to be refinishing the sides of this neck anyway, so I just sanded it. Now after all that, I've got to do some leveling on the neck, so I've got a leveling block with a couple different kinds of sandpaper on it. I've got 280 on one side of it and 500 on the other. That's just an oak block that I cut from a blank that I bought at Home Depot. You can buy leveling beams on Amazon if you prefer a longer one, but this one just works fine for me. And I also use a blue magic marker to mark the tops of the frets, make sure that they're all getting scratched up as the leveling beam goes across. You can see the low spots because the blue is left behind. When the leveling's all done, I get out my fret dagger and I clean up the ends of the frets, and I also re-crown all the frets. That just involves putting a new blue stripe on top and then running the fret dagger across the top of the fret until just the thinnest of blue lines is left over. If you do get rid of that blue line, it's okay. You just don't want to go too far, so it's probably best to stop right at the point where you almost see it disappearing. You may also want to get out a fret dressing file and maybe round off the edges of the frets a little bit. That's up to you, but when all is said and done, you want to just make sure that you don't feel any sharp edges on any of the ends of the frets. And then once you're happy with all of your work, you can do some polishing work with a set of fret erasers. I use a really basic set that's just 3 different grits, but that helps get rid of any scratches that are left over. And then I will actually be doing one more thing to this neck once I actually put the nut on, and that's not going to be in this episode, but we're going to do that soon. But that extra step is to run steel wool over the tops of all the frets, that's quadruple aught, and oil the fretboard. It doesn't leave a mirror-like finish on top of the frets, but it leaves one that I'm comfortable with. And I'm not going for flawless on this guitar because we know what condition it started in. All right, well, with all that work done, this neck is actually feeling great. It really has no sharp edges on any of the sides, and on the top as you run your fingers over, you don't catch any of the lips of the frets as you go over. Everything feels like just a bump, like it should. All right, I think we're coming to the end of the episode here, but I do have a little bit more work I want to do, and that is I want to put some starter holes in, or maybe even get this whole thing mounted. But this is the support plate for the bridge, which is a Wilkinson tremolo. It's a Floyd Rose licensed tremolo. The support plate didn't come with it, but you can get these pretty much anywhere. The way that I'm going to start this, I've flipped the support plate upside down, and I've got a drill bit that's about the same size as the holes that go through here without the threads. So they'll hold that drill bit straight while I go ahead and drill in here. And I'm hoping that's going to do everything for me. I don't have a drill press handy, so I'm just going to wing it this way and see how it turns out. All right, I'm pretty pleased with how that turned out. Now, obviously the holes here are too small and I've got to enlarge them next. And to drill those larger holes, I just used a larger drill bit with a little bit of tape on it to act kind of like a stop. Once that's complete, I press the support plate in by tapping it in lightly with a brass hammer. I use the pivot points for some driving points, but I could have just as easily put a wood block up against it. And then once it's all said and done, I think you'll agree it looks pretty good, and it looks like it's going to fit in that hole just fine. All right, I think that's about enough for today, but I am a little bit nervous about the next step that I've got to do, and that's put that locking nut on the neck. And there's going to be some routing involved. So I think I might actually have to go to the 3D printer and design myself some kind of template that I can use for the routing itself. At any rate, I appreciate you guys hanging out with me. Thanks for all the likes and the subscriptions. Go check out Hack's Guitar Hobby group on Facebook. Make sure you check the description and my Amazon and eBay links. Those things help me out whenever you use them. And as always, thanks a lot, and see you next time.